I was invited to Ben's home just outside of Baltimore, and we discussed the state of our state, the state of our nation, and of our Democratic Party. We were a diverse group brought together by a common vision for this nation. An America where health care is a right for all of us and not a privilege. An America where college students can graduate without the anchor of debt trailing them for a generation. In America in which the government is a steward of the will of the people for the benefit of all people, not just the wealthy top 1% of Americans. And now, just 1 year later, my, how so much has changed. An election which many Americans overlooked and took for granted has shown us just how important these elections are. As we Democrats continue searching for ways to correct our electoral shortcomings, first, we must look within. We as Democrats must question if we sought out to find common ground with our fellow Americans who supported and still do support our president. And we must look ourselves in the mirror and ask if we as a party have more of a message than simply resisting the current administration. For we as Americans have a duty to the world. See, as Americans, sometimes we lose track of our privilege, and we forget that countries and individuals alike look to us as a beacon of hope, shining for all in the darkness. We forget that this democracy that we're all a part of was a revolutionary conception. It was revolutionary in its conception. We as Americans have a duty that's bestowed upon us by our founding fathers to preserve and protect this democracy. And as Marylanders, we're residents of one of the most heavily democratic states in the nation, and with the veto-proof majority we have in our state Senate, we should be leading our fellow states in providing protections and safe haven for our undocumented residents. We should be leading our fellow states in providing universal health care for all, and showing the nation and the world alike that regardless of what happens in Washington, we will not succumb to the hateful rhetoric which aims to divide us. There comes a time in every individual's life, a moment which can define one for a lifetime, where one gets to decide how they will be remembered and the legacy they get to leave behind. If this is that moment in my life, I couldn't be more proud. For last year, Ben challenged us to stand up to the old establishment. He challenged us to be courageous as we fight for the soul of our Democratic Party. But before he challenged us, he led by example, fighting for working families all of his life. First in the mailroom for the Legal Defense Fund for the NAACP, and later as its youngest national president who rebuilt the historic organization. As members of these United States, we have the opportunity to vote and elect a new governor. And as members of the Maryland Democratic Party, we have the opportunity to define our legacy. Will we stand with the people, or will we continue to allow our government to overlook them? Will we continue to nominate moderate Democrats, or will we accept Ben Jealous' challenge to be courageous in our fight in defining our legacy and creating a new frontier, the progressive frontier, right here in Maryland? My name is Robert Julian Ivey. I'm the youngest councilman in the history of my town and the first African American to represent my district. My namesake, Robert Ivey, was a renowned brick mason who literally laid the foundation on which my family and I stand today. I represent the hopes and dreams of a man who lived in constant fear of the Klan. He had the courage to persevere, and I, his great-grandson, have the privilege to challenge the Democratic establishment, the privilege to raise the standards for Democrats, the privilege to help establish the progressive frontier in Maryland. And it is a high honor and the great privilege to introduce my friend and mentor and our next governor, Ben Jealous.
Well, thank you everybody for being here tonight. This is what it looks like when you build a movement. I would like to ask all of the delegates and the city council people and the school board members in the room if you could just raise your hand. All right, and keep them up. And could all the organizers in the room raise your hand? Keep them up. And all the students in the room, raise your hand, keep them up. And all the senior citizens in the room, raise your hand and keep them up. And everybody who's mad as hell, not going to take it anymore, is here at Trump, raise your hand, keep them up. All right, this is what a movement looks like. My name is Ben Jealous, the former national president of the NAACP. I'm endorsed as of tonight by Bernie Sanders and Cory Booker. And if folks want to know what unity in our party looks like, this is what unity in our party looks like. This is the time for us to come together, not as people who are willing to imitate Republican light, but as Democrats who are proud to be Democrats. Democrats who know we are the heirs to the politics of RFK and MLK and Shirley Chisholm and Barbara McCullough and FDR and Mrs. Roosevelt. And what all of them taught us was that when Democrats are Democrats, when we're comfortable with being the party that seeks to advance civil rights for everyone, to end poverty in every community, to advance opportunity for all in our country, we win and we win big. When I was a young man, I was an organizer in Mississippi. And you know, in Mississippi back then, Republicans outnumbered Democrats 2-1. And you know one thing you never see in Mississippi? You don't see Republicans moving to the left trying to convince Democrats to vote for them. But here we are in Maryland, where Democrats outnumber Republicans 2-1. And folks think we should spend millions of dollars on television trying to convince Republicans to vote for us. If a Republican votes for me, they'll vote for me because they want to end the utter corruption that is big pharma. They want to make sure that their small business gets a square deal on health care. They'll vote for me because they want to make sure that their young people can afford to go to college too and not come out in debt. In other words, we're not going to be anything but ourselves. We're going to stand up for our values. We're going to stand up for every working person in this state.
That's right.
And we will absolutely be the party of civil rights and women's rights and union rights, labor rights, workers' rights, without apology. They ask me why I'm doing this, and I tell them it's real simple. Maryland's been a place of opportunity for my family for almost 80 years. My grandma and my granddad came here, him to work the B&O Railroad, her to work for Planned Parenthood. They moved into the housing projects in West Baltimore, and a generation later they waved goodbye to me, flying off to Oxford to be a Rhodes Scholar. It's the type of thing that can only happen in a state like Maryland was, where our schools were always seem to be stronger than others and getting stronger every year. A state where our economy was more robust and had so much power in it that was lifting families out of poverty every year. A place where it was easier than most to not just find a good job, but the good union jobs that my grandparents eventually got to, and whose union wages, put my mom through college, and union pensions put me through college. My grandmother is an actuarial nightmare. She's a 101-year-old union pensioner. And what she can attest to is that the only thing more powerful than the American dream is the Maryland dream. That we're a state that is a little wealthier than most, a lot more progressive than anybody to the south of us, and oftentimes more forward-thinking than those to the north of us. And we've got to get back to Maryland being the Maryland that brought us here in the first place, that attracted us here in the first place, the place that we knew that if we put down roots here, our children could dream a little higher, and our families could succeed a little more. And we can do that. But it means that we have to be prepared to have the courage to stand up and say, enough is enough, Big Pharma. Yes. Enough is enough, scared politician. You know, it's a funny thing, right? I've been an executive, been a CEO since I was 26 years old with a partner in a business. And when you learn in the real world how to be a CEO or a partner in a business, one of the things you learn right away is that if you do not have a tough conversation about the budget, with love, but a tough conversation, you can lose everything. You can lose your organization, you can lose your business, you can lose your job. But when you learn how to be an executive as a politician, the incentives are perpetually misaligned. Because if you do have that conversation, you might lose your job. So you keep kicking the can down the road. See, I hurt my foot. It was not kicking a can down the road, I promise. One thing that you can count on from me is that when it comes to our children, when it comes to education, we will always put it first. We'll put it first from 3K, full day, all the way through university. Yes. And that means that in the first budget, we will figure out how we will fully fund public education in Maryland. Now, on this issue of colleges, some folks have said that I'm a bit starry-eyed because I believe that we can have a Maryland in which we end massive student debt and we pay for it by ending mass incarceration. A lot of Republicans came after me on that point. And one guy who calls himself a progressive even came after me on that point. Ew. Now that progressive, I'll tell you, he's having a fundraiser hosted by a state senator who was just defending Chief Justice Taney. At the House, a mansion named for a guy named Harriman. If you don't know who Harriman was, Google it. A lot of bad karma in that house. And he came out and he said, Mr. Jealous didn't tell us how he was going to pay for it. Now, the first thing is this. I told you how we were going to pay for it. We're going to end mass incarceration. Now, that same legislator had tried to convince me that we already passed the Justice Reinvestment Act. My question to him was, did you look at it before you voted for it? Because, it's like a step in the right direction. It projects to decrease our prison population by 5% in a decade. New York, Georgia have already gone about 25%, one about 20, one about 30%. We can move faster. We're Maryland. Why do we think that anything that's possible in Georgia ain't possible here, but better, but more? But here's the other thing. Here's the other thing I want us just to think about for a second. That same so-called progressive who came after me on saying that we can do what Maryland has done before, because if you go back, the 84 mass incarceration started in our country, say the 1960s. Public universities, 9 hours of minimum wage work would have paid for all your fees. Now it's 47. That's why you know baby boomers who paid their way through college, and you don't know anybody else. When Larry Hogan said that he was going to bring back failed war on drugs policies like truth in sentencing, which is wildly expensive and completely ineffective, the guy who issued the press release saying that I should explain how I'm going to pay for the end of the indebting of our students didn't issue a press release. Because whenever they want to lock up our kids, they never ask the cost. But when we say we're going to educate our kids, they always ask the cost.
School's not prison. School's not prison. School's not prison. School's not prison. School's not prison.
Amen. Amen. And if this campaign, this movement that we're building together is fundamentally about one thing. It is about getting our priorities straight.
That's right.
It is about putting the working families of Maryland back in charge of our state.
That's right.
It is about ensuring that our government is not managed in the interests of lobbyists or corporations or industries that would exploit us and impoverish us. No, it's about ensuring that it's managed well in the interests of our children and our children's children and a better future for all of our families. I'm proud. I'm proud to be endorsed by all 45,000 members of SEIU in Maryland. I'm proud to be endorsed by every postal worker in Maryland, by every nursing union in Maryland, by Friends of the Earth, by Bill McKibben, by a certain senator from Vermont, and by my good brother Cory Booker from New Jersey. But mostly, I'm proud and indebted and grateful to everybody in this room who traveled from Baltimore, from Montgomery County, from right here in Prince George's, from across the state, because we can do this.
Yes.
And when we do this, we will just have taken the first step. Because as I said to you before, this is not about making me governor. I'm an old organizer. I was trained when I was young. No, we don't elect politicians to make change happen. We elect politicians and make it a little easier for us to make change happen. And so mostly I am excited and grateful to you for the days that we're going to have together. Just like a few years ago, we passed marriage equality, we passed the DREAM Act, we abolished the death penalty in 1 year. We're going to have years like that on education and the economy and the environment and ending mass incarceration and ending student debt. Because this is Maryland. And the only thing more powerful than the American dream is the Maryland dream. Thank you and God bless.